In connection with the Wasteland, I have chosen to connect Voltaire's Candide. The two texts, uh, I think, coincide with the way that they end, and also the way they go about throughout their writings. Both are pointing out flaws in Europe at their given time. Voltaire pointing out tyranny and saying that corruption. There's corruption in the church, corruption in the government, and that there's a change that needs to be made. Uh, Eliot, on the other hand, pointing out the devastation in Europe and all the flaws in Europe and Western world civilization, and that something needs to be done here because we're crumbling, and his basis is more crumbling morally and physically. I think Candide goes off kind of the same thing, more philosophical in Candide's and politically in Candide's case. The lines I will connect from the Wasteland to Candide are the last couple lines of the entire poem, but specifically in section 5, What the Thunder Said, lines 425 and 426. Eliot writes, "Shall I at least set my lands in order? London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down." Uh, I connect that with Candide, the last page of the book in our anthology. It is page 319. Candide said, "That is very well put," Candide said, "but we must cultivate our garden." So the two texts link because they are both saying that we need to get things in order here. Both texts, the Wasteland and Candide, go extensively blasting Europe on various issues of their given time. Candide is going more toward France, and I guess most of the Western world, but mostly France politically and philosophically. He's attacking what's his name, Leibniz. He's attacking Leibniz for all of his issues that he sees with his philosophy, his optimism. And he, at the end, Candide finally sees that there's a problem here, and his philosophy is flawed, just like the rest of Europe's philosophy. He sees tyranny in Europe and all those given issues of the time. And likewise, Eliot is calling out issues left and right, moral issues, and just the degrading of society physically and morally, like I said. After devastating wars, Eliot sees the world crumbling, and he does a beautiful way of pointing that out by connecting tons of literature through the history of the West, which was actually more difficult than I thought to find because there's so much there. But anyway, the both texts link because they're starting a new conversation that was not necessarily spoken about. Maybe people knew about it, but it was not on the forefront. And both Candide and the Wasteland put the conversation on the front of the lines, saying that this needs to be addressed and this needs to be talked about now because things are getting bad. Both authors aim for this, but then again, both authors do not give a solution to the problem, which is why both end with Eliot says, "Shall at least set my lands in order," and Candide says, "We must cultivate our garden," both saying the same thing, that we need to get our priorities straight, we as in the West, at that given time, need to get everything handled, get everything in order, and figure out what's going on here because we've got a lot of problems we need to address. So overall, both uh, the poetic statement of world literature, like I said, is beautifully done by Eliot. Connects tons of literature. My favorite connections are with the Inferno, which he does very frequently in the poem, and Augustine's Confessions. Uh, but Eliot saw a devastated Europe after war, and the issues were haunting him. Uh, the poem points out all the immortality in Europe, uh, the lack of crisis of faith, the destruction physically and mentally that many people were experiencing from losing people, losing monuments, just the terrible psychology of war. So, same with Candide, witnessing, uh, going Voltaire having his own personal problems with the government and being attacked and exiled, arrested over and over and over again for his provocative writing. Uh, both are still realistic today. We still have a lot of these problems that both writers talk about, and both have started big conversations, but both are still very relevant in their given time later. Candide, like 200 years later, 300 years, whatever time that was, 200 years later, I think, 300. And then Eliot, still 100 years later, it's gotten arguably worse. I think Eliot would say it's gotten worse. But overall, his poem was very realistic, very true of Europe. And that's it.